These are really sad stories, but they are also stories of strength. Hello. So in this video, we're going to be talking about Not That Woman by Tosin Jobi-Tume, who is a Nigerian playwright. And this play is about the broad spectrum of types of violence that women experience within patriarchal societies. In particular, Jobi-Tume's Nigeria, but not limited to that, right? And so there's sort of layers of direct relevance to this. The play is set in Nigeria. It is most immediately concerned with the experiences of Nigerian women. There's a broader sort of Pan-African concern because this play came out of let me make sure I got the name of the conference right. The Women Playwrights International Conference, which was 2015 in Cape Town, South Africa. And so there's a broader concern with the experiences of African women, because that Women's Playwrights International Conference, as I understand it, was the first one to be held in Africa itself, and so it drew a larger amount of African playwrights than most of the previous conferences had. But then because it was a global female playwrights conference, it also drew this play also draws in the experiences of women from across the world. And so it deals with issues of physical violence or domestic abuse. It deals with issues of sexual violence. It deals with issues of emotional and psychological violence, of human trafficking, sex slavery, etc., etc. And so men are often the villains in this play, because men perpetrate the vast majority of domestic abuse, of sexual violence, etc., etc. But the play is also very critical of the women who maintain these systems of violence, whether that's mothers who teach their daughters to accept abuse. There's a great line. There's a line that I remember from Yenta in Fiddler on the Roof. It's something like, even the worst husband, God forbid, is better than no husband, God forbid. And that's really central to the ethos of Not That Woman, right? This idea, at one point, there's this woman named Joyce, who comes in. I forget who she's talking to. Oh, yes. She's talking to this woman named Kechi. Nkechi works at the Succor for Women's Refuge, which is basically a sort of women's shelter and community resource center that attempts to provide women who have been abused, women who don't have financial means, whatever it is, with the support that they need. And the sort of overarching structure of this play is about the SWR, the Succor for Women's Refuge, which was founded by Madam B, whom the characters believe has been murdered by her husband. And each of the characters who works there tells their own story of victimhood, of being married as a child bride and having a miscarriage basically destroy not just the woman's reproductive organs, but excretory system. That doesn't sound right, but like the lower portion of the digestive system, et cetera, et cetera. One woman was enslaved in a baby mill where she was raped weekly until she had children that this orphanage owner could sell. Several of the women experienced incest, domestic violence, spousal rape, etc., etc. Really, really, really gruesome stuff. It is not an easy play by any stretch of the imagination. But this woman, Joyce, comes in, and she is very pregnant with her 5th child, I think. Her husband regularly has affairs. He beats her repeatedly, including during this play, not on stage, but he beats her. She has to, like, he calls her and says, I'm coming home for lunch. And so she has to, like, run off to try and get home before he does, because she's not allowed to leave the house or to have friends without his permission. And he catches her outside the house, and so he beats her, and she comes back. Even though she's pregnant, he beats her. And so the women of the SWR are trying to get her to leave this guy. But she also has no money. She gave up her law practice because he didn't want her to have a job, etc., etc. So she's really in a very precarious position. But there's this Nkechi in particular is trying to convince Joyce to leave her abusive husband. And Nkechi says at one point, you mean he still beats you in this condition and you are still with him? Joyce says, what am I supposed to do? I am an African woman and my place is with my husband. It is for better or worse. For better, for worse, remember? Nkechi says, you don't say. Joyce defensively says, isn't it so everywhere? Any African woman that tells you otherwise is a liar. Nkechi says, I honestly can't believe what you're saying. An educated woman like you. Joyce says, and what has education got to do with marriage? Nkechi says, everything. Joyce says, tactically changing the subject, says, meanwhile, let's talk about you. Have you no plans to marry? You do realize that your biological clock is ticking fast, right? Pray tell, how do you cope without a man? Nkechi dryly says, who says I don't have a man, or men even? Joyce snorts, how come you are not married then? You better hurry up, my friend. Time is not your friend. Menopause beckons. Nkechi says, marriage isn't for everyone. Frankly, I think I'm better off being single than to be married to a man who sees me as a punching bag. Joyce says, you know something, Nkechi? If I didn't know better, I'd say you were jealous of me. Nkechi says, jealous of you? What are you on about? Joyce says, yes, you're jealous of my married status. You see, even though my husband abuses me, he is still my husband, and I am better off. And so this is one of the things that's quite interesting about the play, is while it definitely does clearly and directly and repeatedly call out male violence against women, it also is critical of women for providing an infrastructure for this kind of violence. Again, whether that's the sort of cultural association that being married is inherently better than not being married, regardless of the quality of that marriage and what manner of suffering one undergoes. We see instances where the SWR women sort of act as Joyce's mother-in-law and her own mother, basically shaming her for not wanting her husband to beat her. So women who raise their daughters to expect abuse and to accept abuse as part of a normal life. Women who raise their sons, allowing them to think that abusing women is normal or acceptable. So we have all of these sort of ways in which the society as a whole is being held accountable for not necessarily promoting violence against women, but for creating and maintaining a system in which that violence is seen as normal and acceptable. And the play as a whole takes this very strong stance against this. And actually, especially at the end, this play very much embraces a sort of agitprop tradition, right? So agitprop, agitation and propaganda is what this was short for. This was a genre that developed primarily in the 1930s, but the 20s as well. And basically it was a workers' type of theater in which people would play out scenes from sort of everyday life, right? The type of real experiences that audience members would recognize, and then they would say in this very sort of Brechtian way, this is the lesson of this story that you've just seen. Here is what you should go out into the world and do. Join a union. Don't tolerate subpar working conditions. Don't cooperate with the police when they come looking for labor organizers, etc., etc. And this style of performance has been sort of carried through to various resistance movements, etc., etc. The anti-apartheid struggle, a lot of anti-apartheid plays pick up on this sort of agitprop energy. Something like The Hungry Earth by, I can't remember the playwright's name. For some reason, Mpase is jumping into my head, but I think that's wrong. But the Hungry Earth, for instance, is one really great example of this, where it's just very much, here is a problem that we as a community all are familiar with. Go out and do this thing. And Not That Woman very much embraces this at the end. So I want to read you I want to read you the whole ending portion of this. Because at one point, it turns out Madame B has not been murdered by her husband, but she was nearly murdered by her husband, and so they have sort of kept Folake and one of the other, and the police have sort of kept quiet that she survived, so that her husband would not attempt to come back and finish the job. And so she re-emerges to the joy and shock of the SWR women. But they have this long discussion about women's responsibility for maintaining these structures that perpetuate violence. And then we have this end bit. So Folake says, Now, I'm not saying that everything is entirely the fault of women. Of course, the men are culpable too. They are, after all, men. But you see, we women need to start telling ourselves a few home truths. We run the society, so we should tactically position ourselves to not be victims. Madame B says that's right. Right from birth, we teach our daughters to be second-class citizens in their own world. We raise them to aspire to become wives to successful men. We don't give them the hope of becoming successful women in their own rights. It is saddening. Folake says, and why is it so difficult for women to raise their daughters to demand and enjoy respect from the men in their lives? Why are we so oblivious of our power? Don't we know that we determine how society treats us? Madame B says, women lose their self-worth, self-esteem, joy, and even life just to stay with an abuser and please their families and societies. When will the carnage stop? When? And here's where it really gets agitprop-y. Folake says, the time is now. We must begin to conscientize our society to develop zero tolerance for harmful socio-cultural practices and violence against women. Zainab says, and we must begin to raise our male children to respect and treat women right. And Nkechi says, we must also raise our female children to respect themselves and know that they are deserving of respect. Joyce says, women must begin to empower themselves. We must stop expecting men to do everything for us. Madam B says, great. All these firebrand rants are music to the ears, but who will bell the cat? Who? It begins with you and me. I know that I am going to do my best to raise my only son to respect women as the mothers and the backbone of our society. But what about the other women out there? She turns to the other women. What about you? Turns to the audience. What about you? And Madam B steps forward and says, it begins with me. I will not be that woman who encourages her daughter to stay in an abusive relationship or marriage. A dead woman is neither a wife nor a mother. At best, she is referred to as a late wife or mother. Balake steps forward and says, it begins with me. I will encourage every female around me to dare to dream, nurture their self-esteem, and be the best they can be. I refuse to be an enabler of women's inequality with men. Nkechi steps forward and says, it begins with me. I will not be that woman who mocks or judge any woman for being single, divorced, widowed, or childless. A woman is a complete human being regardless of her marital status. Zainab steps forward and says, it begins with me. I will not be a party to practices that stunt the development and well-being of women. I choose to support the cause of the girl child. Joyce steps forward. It begins with me. I will not be a monster-in-law or a passive mother. My sons will know that it is unacceptable to bully or hit a woman. And no, I will not be the other woman. I refuse to be the reason for a fellow woman's heartache. Madam B says, that's the spirit, ladies. That's the spirit. And the song We Shall Overcome rents the air, as the stage directions say.